For the second build of Plague Week, we have another build that is a ton of fun even if it doesn't go viral, and that is the Rabies Fire Claw Druid, a variant that was not possible in Diablo 2 2.3 due to the sheer amount of points needed to properly synergize Fire Claw. Now, with only 2 synergies necessary, we're able to pump Fire Claw up to a reasonable level for single target damage while working on some crowd control with Rabies, and with the addition of the new rune words, it makes this a bit interesting. Now, before we dive too far in, I do want to note, I still think Rabies needs to be given the same treatment as Plague Javelin and Poison Nova, though I would recommend a 5-second duration rather than a variable duration. This will limit its spread, but 5 seconds is more than enough for it to reach a reasonable contagion distance and serve its purpose as crowd control. That said, much like the Plague Javazon we covered last time, we're using the Poison as our crowd control tool, and our secondary element, in this case Fire Claw, as our boss killing tool. Though, unlike the Javazon, who was juggling multiple offensive skills with hotkeys, we're actually juggling only 2 main skills using our weapon swap instead, while our right click is simply reserved for maintaining our summons. The main strategy here is to plop out a Rabies or 2 into a crowd, and if you're lucky, getting hit a couple times and dropping lower resist along the way, though even if you don't proc that, swap to the Fire Claw and start chewing through the enemies that are closest to you for leech and recovery. Generally speaking, the poison will usually either outright kill any enemies in the crowd after the first few seconds, or get them down so far that even half sneezing at them with Fire Claw or the physical damage we pair it with will outright kill them in one hit. And we do a similar strategy for bosses, dropping the Rabies in and then just chunking them with Fire Claw until they're dead. For our stats, due to how I set this one up specifically, I only need enough strength and dexterity for our equipment and the rest into vitality. For more budget versions of this, you may need to consider some attack rating modifications either through dexterity or through some gear swaps, so keep that in mind, though with our mercenary gear and to a limited extent weapon choice, we don't need to worry about it much here. This is because our mercenary is using Infinity, which admittedly greatly helps our damage on Fire Claw, but also greatly diminishes enemy defense, allowing us to guarantee a hit almost every time, even with sub 10k attack rating. To shore him up a bit, we went with the usual Fortitude and Vampire's Gaze, though as usual, just a reminder that the main purpose of mercenary armor and helmets is to get the resist and leech up, while the weapon is usually your main utility tool. In regards to our skills, there's a few approaches you can take, though since this is Plague Week, we're of course going to be prioritizing that by maxing out not only Rabies to boost the poison damage up significantly, but also its synergy in Poison Creeper, which, while not absolutely deadly, can still do a little work with about 800 poison damage per second. I will summon it back in from time to time just to help to keep things poisoned, but it's not entirely necessary to keep up. That said, most people will generally tend to prefer focusing on the fire end of this build, which is a 60-point investment in Fire Claw and its 2 synergies, which even with only 31 points in synergies instead of 40, we still do over 9,000 damage per swing, which works out pretty nice. If you focus on Fire Claw primarily, you can actually do significantly more. Though since that's single target, you generally would have to rely more on friends, but we do get friends in this one as well, namely a 1-point Grizzly and a 1-point Oak Sage for some support, distractions, and control, which do come in handy when we're not going max block. If you skip these, you could max out Fire Claw synergies earlier, but for our purposes, I'd rather have the bodies just kind of protecting us and giving us distractions. As far as investing in our other shapeshifting skills, I just let our plus skills handle it for the most part, since it gets us up over the 5-minute duration, which is more than enough to clear any individual area in the game, and was generally enough to clear multiple areas without needing to recast. And since you can't carry a shapeshifted form between acts, there was no worry about needing to long haul this, nor needing to really kind of like get that much more life for normal play, since we already get over 2,700 life with our poison weapon swap, and almost 3,000 with our Fire Claw weapon swap. Though, speaking of weapon swaps, that brings us to gear, which oddly enough is a lot more flexible than you'd think, though there are a few things that we did to help out our punch. Namely, on our poison swap, we used our 3 rainbow facet Headhunter's Glory, which helps us with our poison piercing quite a bit, and combined it with a Plague Phase Blade, because I'll be damned if I want to repair a weapon. Not to mention, it's relatively quick, gives us even more on-weapon minus poison resist, and a chance to cast lower resist when we're struck, which helps both our Fire Claw when we swap, as well as any poison damage spreading through the crowd. Not to mention, it does okay physical damage with a bite attack while applying open wounds and freeze target. On the fire weapon swap, we actually lose some fire damage due to the loss of plus skills, but the piercing makes up for it with a Phoenix on the shield. This also gives us Redemption Aura, a chunky boost to physical damage, and a chance to cast a somewhat synergized level 22 Firestorm, which surprisingly is not terrible. We however did not pair that with a Phoenix Sword, mainly because we want to save a couple frames on attack speed, which Grief provides, along with maintaining minus poison resist since our Rabies is still floating around, and also we actually do want the improved physical damage of Grief for Leech until we get our bodies to consume. After that, the gear will be mostly familiar. I went with Jalal's main for plus skills. This one's shelled so we can hit our 86% hit recovery breakpoint easier, but you could always put a rainbow facet in instead and aim for the lower hit recovery tier or use charms to cover the gap. On the armor, I went Bramble because, well, theme. If I was leaning heavier into Fireclaw or even wanted to just make a more durable build, I would actually favor Chains of Honor here since it checks a lot of boxes. Though Bramble does bring a lot of nice things to the table, not the least of which is faster hit recovery, as well as the poison damage boost, of course. The addition of Thorns Aura also gives us a little bit to punish the enemies that focus on our Spirit and Bear, but only a little bit. For the amulet, I went with High Lord, specifically for the Deadly Strike, but +1 all skills and lightning resist are always welcome additions as well. But as I said earlier, I want physical damage on this too, and this amulet is one of the best tools for that goal of making us capable of being a triple element threat with physical fire and poison. On the boots, we grabbed Gore Riders for even more tech, adding to our bleed chance, our deadly strike, as well providing a pinch of crushing blow, which comes in handy a lot when doing melee in general, regardless of your class. And it's one of the reasons why these are some of my favorite boots in the game. As far as the rings, I actually favored my Martial class setup for this, even though technically I should be going plus skills for boosting the poison damage. This means I went with Ravenfrost to keep from getting chilled by most things so I can keep attacking quickly, and the Dual Leech ring you see me use everywhere because it helps keep me alive until we get Corpses for Redemption, or just in case I don't notice I overswapped and missed swapping to my fire set or one of the above, it can keep me alive in a pinch. So yeah, if I get stuck on my Rabies setup, it can still keep me alive with the Life Leech. On the belt, I did actually end up getting my plus skills with Arachnid Mesh. I went with this because it does that, but also it provides slow target effect, which is pretty handy against bosses and some annoying tanky immunes. Obviously, this is catering to the Rabies side of the equation, but it still works fine with fire if you want to do that, though there are some better swaps if you don't care as much about the actual poison damage or plus skills. Lastly, it's Trangul's Claws again, which unlike the Amazon build where you could have gone Lancer's Gloves, there really isn't a similar setup for the poison-based druid, though if you were leaning into the fire side of things a bit more, you could look into Mage Fist for the plus skills there. I just wanted to poison love again because, well, theme. As far as the inventory, it's set up for plus skills on charms, and that's about it. I'm actually really happy I went with this fire poison setup challenge that was given to me, rather than the physical poison setup I was originally planning to do for this for the part of Plague Week, since this is a lot more viable than I was originally giving it credit for, thanks to the Fireclaw damage and the lowered amount of synergies. That said, I still stand by my recommendation that they should make Fireclaw synergize with Armageddon, rather than Firestorm and Molten Boulder, since it feels bad to invest in skills you can't actively use on a character during normal gameplay.